me ask a question from Peter Moore. He asks, the relationship between, I think, Ian Paisley, maybe is what he means, and Martin McGuinness. No, sorry, excuse me. The relationship between Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness felt a lot closer than the relationship now between Mary Lou and Michelle O'Neill, he says. Is that a fair interpretation of the dynamic, he asks? Media reports say that Dublin Sinn Féin told the Northern operation to scrap their plans for reopening hospitality without alcohol. An interesting question there from Peter.
Well, it is interesting. It's interesting on two fronts. Firstly, I mean, Martin and Gerry, of course, were very, very close. And myself and Michelle are very close. I mean, we're colleagues, we're friends. So we've a very good and a very strong relationship. And by the way, neither of us take direction from others. It's gas. I heard this thing that Michelle was directed by Dublin. I'm assuming by Dublin is meant to me, you know, what to do. Nothing of the sort. I mean, we work together. I have enormous respect for Michelle and for my colleagues in the North.
You are the party leader, Mary Lou. You call the shots at the end of the day. So if you want to go a certain direction and Michelle doesn't, you know, it's your vote that counts.
But I'll tell you a better one. Well, no, well, I mean, that's not. You see, when you lead a large organisation, the approach of my way or the highway is never the wisest approach, Thomas. Just tip for the top if you ever find yourself in that position. But of course, I'm in charge, absolutely. But equally, I mean, the same people who have gone on and on and on about William Hampton's money and trying to make a big controversy around that would have you believe that I'm directed by Belfast. So, I mean, it's just nonsense. And I have to say this, I wonder sometimes, is it because we happen to be women in political leadership? And I'm not doing the poor me routine. There's no poor me about it. I'm a very able and a very seasoned operator. So I'm not saying that in a way of any form of sort of self-pity. But I just wonder, is it for some people when they see women in leadership positions or a woman like me leading a large organisation, is there somewhere in their brain that they think, well, a woman couldn't possibly do that? And if that is the case, I have to enlighten those people that, in fact, I am the leader and I don't take direction from anyone. And Michelle O'Neill knows her own mind and does her job. Well, similarly, not under the direction of anyone else.
I'm sure, and I'm so sure as well, you know, critics would certainly not suggest in any way that they are sexist, but it's an interesting point you raised. Let me ask Mary Lou about another type of relationship, which is between the First Minister and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland. Famously, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness became close. They were known as the Chuckle Brothers. Then we had a period of time when Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster were quite close. I remember Marlene becoming a moniker for a certain period of time. Has that relationship become more strained over the last number of years? And how important is that relationship to effective governance and progress?
I think it's very important. I mean, all of the relationships on the executive matter, you know, collective responsibility and collective relationships and dynamics really, really matter. But for those two people, Michelle and Arlene in the First Minister's and Deputy First Minister's office, of course that matters. And it's also fair to say that it's a challenging relationship by definition. I mean, Arlene Foster is the leader of the DUP. They are a union party. They have a particular view of the world. Michelle is an Irish Republican. She's the deputy leader of Sinn Féin. So, of course, there's going to be natural tensions. But I do want to say this. I mean, I've given you my view of the last week or so and the use of the community veto, which was disgraceful. But there have been times in the management of this crisis where the executive has done really well. And Arlene and Michelle have done really well in very, very difficult circumstances. And I think it's important to register that as well. And by extension, can I say, members more generally of the executive. And it's in political life and public life, it's always necessary to kind of criticise and to identify failures or shortcomings or chaos like we saw last week with this business around.
I wonder, just Mary, some observers might suggest that the relationship that existed between Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness was a close one, and that seemed to be a period of time in which enormous progress was made. And some of those same observers have not seen the same level of the same strength of relationship between subsequent First Ministers and Deputy First Ministers. Do you think that the strength of that relationship is what dictates progress in this part of the world?
No, I don't think it's the entirety of it. I mean, no political system and progress in any political system can't revolve around just two people. But I do accept that everyone on the executive and the First Ministers in particular have a particular role in kind of setting the tone and the feel, and I think can certainly lead from the front. Of that there is no doubt. Just remember, Thomas, that when Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness went into those offices, I remember it very clear. I actually remember being in the Great Hall and them walking down with Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair. And at that time, people would have said, first of all, people would have thought that you were absolutely crazy if you had suggested that these two men, could work together, much less that they would actually form a friendship, quite a deep friendship between each other. But it did happen. But it took time. All of these things take time. Yeah. And no two sets of relationships, by the way, look or feel the same, because people are people and people are different. And that relationship in the First Minister's office between Arlene and Michelle, of course, is important, but it is also important that everyone on the executive collectively lifts the load, and that the relationships generally in the executive are healthy and strong.